Currently, Earth. It was March 8th in the year 1669 that Mount Etna on the island of Sicily in modern-day Italy begins rumbling. Multiple eruptions over the next few weeks continued the eternity of more than 20,000 people and left thousands more homeless. Most of the victims could have saved themselves by fleeing, but stayed in a vain attempt to save their city. Mount Etna dominates the island of Sicily, rising 11,000 feet above sea level in the northeast section of Sicily. It can be seen from just about every part of the island. The geologic history of Mount Etna demonstrates that it has been periodically spewing ash and lava for thousands of years. The first recorded eruption of the volcano was in 475 BCE. It is the most active volcano in Europe. In 1169, an earthquake just prior to an eruption continued the eternity of 15,000 people on Sicily. Despite the dangers of living near an active volcano, the eruptions made the surrounding soil very fertile, so many small villages developed on the slopes of the mountain. When Etna began to rumble and belch gas on March 8th, the residents nearby ignored the warning signs of a larger eruption. 3 days later, the volcano began spewing out nauseous fumes in large quantities. Approximately 3,000 people living on the slopes of the mountain continued their eternity just from asphyxiation. Even worse, Etna was soon emitting tremendous amounts of ash and molten lava. The ash was sent out with such force that significant amounts came down in the southern part of mainland Italy, in some cases nearly 100 miles away. Lava also began pouring down the south side of the mountain, heading towards the city of Catania, 18 miles to the south along the sea. At the time, the city of Catania had about 20,000 residents. Most failed to flee the city immediately. Instead, Diego de Papalardo, a resident of the city, led a team of 50 men to Mount Etna, where they attempted to divert the lava flow. Wearing cowhides soaked in water, the men bravely approached the lava with long iron rods, picks, and shovels. They were able to hack open a hole in the hardened lava wall that had developed on the outside of the lava flow, and much of the flow began to flow west out of the new hole. However, the residents of Paterno, a city lying southwest of Etna, were monitoring these developments and quickly realized that this new flow direction could imperil their own city. They literally fought back the Catanians while the lava breach hardened and filled again. For several weeks, the lava flow pushed towards Catania and the sea. Still, the residents failed to evacuate the city. Apparently, they remained hopeful that the lava would stop or the city's ancient defensive walls would protect them. Neither was the case. The walls were quickly swallowed by the extremely hot lava, and nearly 17,000 people in Catania continued their eternity. Most of the city was destroyed. Catania was not the only city affected. The eruption wiped out 14 towns and villages and left about 27,000 people homeless. Following this disaster, it was decreed that interference with the natural flow of lava was prohibited in Italy, a regulation that remained in effect hundreds of years later. It was March 8th in the year 1957 that Egypt opened the Suez Canal. Following Israel's withdrawal from occupied Egyptian territory, the Suez Canal is reopened to international traffic. However, the canal was so littered with wreckage from the Suez Crisis that it took weeks of cleanup by Egyptian and United Nations workers before larger ships could navigate the waterway. The Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean and Red Seas across Egypt, was completed by French engineers in 1869. For the next 88 years, it remained largely under British and French control, and Europe depended on it as an inexpensive shipping route for oil from the Middle East. In July of 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the canal, hoping to charge tolls that would pay for the construction of a massive dam on the Nile River. In response, Israel invaded in late October, and British and French troops landed in early November, occupying the canal and other Suez territory. Under pressure from the United Nations, Britain and France withdrew in December, and Israeli forces departed in March of 1957. That month, Egypt took over control of the canal and reopened it to commercial shipping. 10 years later, Egypt shut down the canal again following the Six-Day War and Israel's occupation of the Sinai Peninsula. It remained closed for 8 years, ending when Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat reopened it in 1975 after peace talks with Israel. It was on March 8th in the year 2014 that Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members, loses contact with air traffic control less than an hour after takeoff from Kuala Lumpur, then veers off course and disappears. Most of the plane and everyone on board are never seen again. The plane departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. and was scheduled to arrive at Beijing Capital International Airport at 6:30 a.m. local time. However, at 1:07 a.m., the aircraft's last automated position report was sent, and at 1:19 a.m., what turned out to be the final voice transmission from the cockpit of the doomed jetliner was relayed to air traffic controllers. Quote, "Good night, Malaysian 370, unquote. A message that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. About an hour after Flight 370 was scheduled to land in Beijing, Malaysia Airlines announced it was missing. Prior to the aircraft's mysterious disappearance, it had been flying seemingly without incident. There were no distress signals from the plane or reports of bad weather or technical problems. The ensuing search for Flight 370 initially was centered on the Gulf of Thailand, where the plane was traveling when radar contact was lost. Investigators looked into the possibility of terrorist involvement in the plane's disappearance after it was discovered that 2 passengers had been using stolen passports. However, this theory, at least in relation to the 2 men, soon was determined to be unlikely. The people on board Flight 370 represented 15 nations, with more than half the passengers from China and 3 from the U.S. Then, on March 15th, investigators said that the satellite transmissions indicated Flight 370 had turned sharply off its assigned course and flown west over the Indian Ocean, operating on its own for 5 hours or more. On March 24th, Malaysia's Prime Minister announced the flight was presumed lost somewhere in the Indian Ocean with no survivors. As the search for the aircraft continued, with more than 24 nations, including the U.S., participating in the effort, the mystery of how a commercial jetliner could vanish without a trace received global media attention. In June of 2014, Australian officials involved in the investigation said radar records suggested that Flight 370 likely was flying on autopilot for hours before it ran out of fuel and crashed into the southern Indian Ocean. The officials did not publicly speculate about who put the plane on autopilot after it veered off course or why, although they did indicate it was possible the crew and passengers had become unresponsive due to hypoxia or oxygen loss sometime before the plane crash. No explanation for what might have caused the oxygen deprivation was provided by the officials. Meanwhile, other authorities suggested one of the pilots of Flight 370 could have deliberately flown the aircraft into the Indian Ocean on a suicide mission, although there was no conclusive evidence to support this theory. Throughout 2015 and 2016, debris from the aircraft washed ashore on the western Indian Ocean, but the fate of Flight 370 remains a mystery. On July 17th in 2014, 4 months after Flight 370 vanished, tragedy struck again for Malaysia Airlines when one of its planes was shot down over eastern Ukraine near the Russian border. All 298 people aboard the aircraft, also a Boeing 777, continued their eternity. European and American officials believe that Flight 17, which took off from Amsterdam, was en route to Kuala Lumpur, was downed by a Russian-made surface-to-air missile fired from territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists battling the Ukrainian government. The rebel leaders and President Vladimir Putin of Russia denied any responsibility for the incident. The information documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.